The call came on a grey March morning, the kind where the clouds hang low enough to scrape the edges of your thoughts. My brother, Michael, spoke with a tone so falsely gentle that I recognized the truth before he said a word. "It's done," he said. "The workshop is mine now." Just like that. I had waited 2 months for Grandpa's will to be read, hoping against hope that his promise still meant something, that those quiet hours I'd spent by his side sanding oak boards and cleaning old chisels had mattered. He had told me time and again that the workshop would be mine one day. He'd squeezed my hand the last time I saw him and whispered it again. But the will left it all, every tool, every blueprint, every stained glass window he'd installed with his own hands, to my younger brother instead. I felt the shock hit like a blow to the ribs. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Michael, always impatient, filled the silence. "Look," he said, "I know you loved the place, but it's legally mine. And I already have plans for it." I didn't ask what plans. I already knew. Michael had a long, predictable history of flipping anything of value for quick cash. Antique furniture, our grandmother's china set, even the piano Mom had saved up for. If he couldn't drink it, date it, or sell it, he didn't want it. "I'm sorry, Linda," he said, as if practicing empathy in front of a mirror. "But it is what it is." I hung up. I couldn't trust myself to speak. I drove to the workshop. The gravel crunched under my tires the same way it had when Grandpa and I would arrive before sunrise, carrying mugs of coffee and so much unspoken belonging between us. But this time, the gates were locked. A red and white sign slapped across the fence. "Property pending sale." He was selling it. Immediately. I pressed my hands against the cold metal bars, feeling the sting of betrayal far sharper than the morning air. This was the place where I had learned patience, precision, and how hands could speak when words failed. This was the place where Grandpa had trusted me with his legacy. And now, it was about to belong to strangers. The wind shifted, and for a moment, I swear I smelled cedar shavings, the scent that had always followed Grandpa like a quiet signature. It felt like a nudge, a memory, or maybe even a call to arms. That was the moment, standing at the locked gate, my breath fogging in the air, when I felt something settle deep inside me. Not anger. Not yet. But resolve. If the world wasn't going to honor his promise, then I would. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and took the first picture. The sign, the gate, the workshop beyond it. Documentation. Always start with documentation. I didn't know then how far the truth would take me, or how heavy the cost of justice would be. But I knew this. I wasn't letting that workshop go. Not without a fight. And especially not to my brother. The first document is saved. The first line is drawn. But the truth behind the will, and Michael's role in it, has only begun to surface. My name is Linda Heron, and I turned 63 last November. 63 is an age people like to underestimate. Too old to start over, too soft to stand ground, too tired to fight. I've learned to let them underestimate me. There is power in being quietly misjudged. I live alone now, in a modest house on the outskirts of Fairgrove, where the fields stretch long and the seasons move at their own pace. My husband passed when I was 51. Cancer. That one word rearranged my life like a tornado rearranges a field, without permission and without apology. After he died, I retreated into work, office administration at a small architectural firm, but the days felt too long and too empty. That's when I returned to woodworking, the old hobby Grandpa had taught me when I was just 12. The memory of those afternoons, him laughing softly as I tried to plane a crooked board straight, became a rope I held onto during the darkest years. The workshop wasn't just a building. It was the place where I remembered how to breathe. Grandpa saw that. He always saw more than he said. When he told me, "One day, this will be yours," it hadn't sounded like a promise made in passing. It sounded like a truth he had already carved into the grain of our lives. And to be clear, I never wanted anything else from him. Not the money he saved from 30 years in the Navy. Not the land he leased out to the local farmers. Just the workshop. I've spent the past decade rebuilding myself piece by piece, much like the furniture I crafted in my garage. Quiet strength suits me. I don't yell. I don't argue. But I listen, closely. And I take notes. So when Michael called that morning, sounding so smugly triumphant, it awakened something I hadn't felt in years. Not bitterness. Purpose. Michael and we've never walked the same path. He's 8 years younger, charming in a polished stone sort of way, smooth until you scratch the surface. People trusted him far longer than they should have. I learned early that he measured relationships by what he could extract from them. I once believed he'd grow out of that. I was wrong. But even knowing who he was, I still didn't expect Grandpa to leave the workshop to him. Grandpa loved him, yes, but he never trusted him with delicate things. And that workshop was delicate in its own way, full of memories, hand-built rigs, antique tools calibrated so precisely they bordered on instrument status. So why would Grandpa give it to the least careful person in the family? I didn't yet know the answer, but I could feel it in my bones. Something about that will wasn't right. Grandpa wasn't careless. And he didn't break promises. Not to me. If I was going to honor him, I needed to know the truth behind that signature, behind that sudden change of inheritance. And truth has a way of revealing itself to those patient enough to search for it. Little did I know, the search would lead me into old family wounds, hidden lies, and one decision that would change everything. A memory surfaces. Grandpa's last whisper to Linda. But if his intention was clear, then who altered the will? Families look simple from the outside. Ours wasn't. Growing up, the Heron household was stitched together with thin threads of responsibility and obligation, not affection. My mother adored Michael, her unexpected miracle baby, conceived when she thought she was too old. She fussed over him, excused him, shielded him from consequences. In her eyes, he could do no wrong. By the time he turned 10, she had rewritten the family story so thoroughly that I became the responsible one, the caretaker, the helper. Michael became the promising one, the one whose charm would take him far. Our father kept to himself. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. He wasn't unkind, just absent. And then there was Grandpa. He was the only adult who looked at me as though I were real. When he retired from the Navy and built his workshop behind his house, he invited me to help him. Not Michael. Just me. I was 15. He told me I had steady hands and a patient heart, both gifts in woodworking. I still remember the first time I watched him carve a dovetail joint. His hands moving with such quiet certainty that I felt, for the first time, that I wanted to be like someone. Michael rarely visited the workshop. He said it smelled like old trees and old people. He preferred attention, noise, and the thrill of being seen. Grandpa preferred quiet. Still, he loved Michael the way people love the weather, accepting it, even when it disrupts their plans. But I was the one he trusted. He said it outright once, during a late afternoon when the golden light slanted across his workbench. You understand the soul of things, Linda. You don't rush the grain. I never forgot that. But our family's imbalance meant that every gift came with tension. Mom resented the time I spent with Grandpa. She said I was hiding behind hobbies, instead of helping with Michael. My father stayed silent. When Grandpa's health began to decline, I visited often. Michael didn't. Claims of being too busy or stressed. Yet he always showed up for important paperwork meetings, bank accounts, house deeds, insurance discussions. I noticed, but I didn't question it. Not then. After Grandpa passed, the reading of the will felt like watching someone rearrange the furniture of my memory without asking. My mother looked satisfied. My father unreadable. Michael looked like a cat that had already swallowed the canary. Something felt wrong. Not just emotionally. Logically. Grandpa had told me about his will years earlier. He'd shown me the draft. My name was there beside the workshop. So what had changed? And when? And, perhaps most importantly, who benefited from the change? That was the question that began to pulse beneath everything else. Because inheritance doesn't divide families. Secrets do. And ours were about to surface, one by one. Linda recalls that Grandpa once showed her a draft will naming her as the workshop heir. Why, then, did the finalized version say otherwise? 2 days after the will reading, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I never drank. The steam curled into the air like a question I couldn't answer. I laid out everything I remembered about the draft will. Where Grandpa kept it, what he'd said, how confidently he'd pointed to my name next to the workshop. I knew what he intended. But the paperwork told a different story. For a while, I tried to chalk it up to a change of heart. People age. People reconsider. Maybe he thought Michael needed it more. Maybe he assumed I'd be fine without it. But that explanation crumbled the moment I visited the workshop again. This time, the front door was open. Someone was inside. I stepped quietly across the gravel until I recognized the silhouette. Michael, holding Grandpa's old ledger book. Not a tool. Not a blueprint. The ledger. He snapped it shut the moment he saw me, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I could say the same to you," I replied. He placed the ledger into a cardboard box marked sale items. My chest tightened. That ledger held decades of notes, prices, measurements, sketches. It was practically a family heirloom. "You're selling everything?" I asked. "Of course I am. That's the point of inheriting something, isn't it?" he said, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "Besides, Grandpa wasn't exactly sitting on a treasure chest. I need the workshop gone fast." The casual cruelty in his voice hit me harder than the words themselves. "Michael, did Grandpa tell you he was changing the will?" He stiffened. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying nothing," I said evenly. "I'm asking." He smirked, just slightly. That half-smile he used whenever he was hiding something. "I didn't influence him," he said, which was an answer to a question I hadn't asked. His eyes flicked toward the ledger box again, and something inside me settled. Not anger. Certainty. There was a reason he wanted this place liquidated so quickly. Before I could press him further, a man walked into the workshop, mid-40s, clipboard in hand, wearing a realtor's badge. "Mr. Heron," he said, "the buyers want to know if the closing can happen this week." "This week," I repeated. Michael avoided my eyes. "Cash buyers," he said. Very eager. I felt the betrayal land in 2 places at once. First, in the realization that he was dismantling Grandpa's legacy purely for profit. Second, in the unmistakable sense that the will had not changed organically. Someone had steered it. And that someone was standing in front of me. When I asked for a copy of the will, Michael refused. "It's none of your business now," he said. "What matters is that it's legal." Then he added, "And if you try to contest it, you'll lose. Don't embarrass yourself." He left me standing in the workshop's doorway, the dust swirling through the sunlight like 1,000 tiny witnesses. The betrayal was complete. But it wasn't over. Because betrayal is only the beginning. The investigation is where the truth takes shape. Linda sees a flicker of panic in Michael's expression, something he tried to hide. What exactly was he afraid she might find? I began with what I trusted most: documentation. I started a digital folder titled Workshop Inquiry and began filling it. Photos of the workshop, notes on conversations, dates, times, the realtor's name, the sale listing. A timeline formed, clean and sharp. But I needed more than organization. I needed proof. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. Grandpa's neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, knocked on my door carrying a tin of oatmeal cookies. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and gifted with the kind of observational skills that come from years of tending gardens and watching people. "I heard about the workshop," she said, settling into my kitchen chair. "Your grandpa told me he left it to you, you know." Her certainty made my pulse jump. "He told me that too," I said. But the will says otherwise. She leaned in conspiratorially. He said a lawyer came by the week before he passed. A new one. A man he didn't like much. My breath caught. Do you know his name? She shook her head. But he had one of those fancy briefcases. And he drove a silver BMW. I remember because he parked in my spot. I smiled despite myself. That was Mrs. Fletcher, justice in all forms. Her comment stirred a memory. A month before Grandpa died, Michael had mentioned he was suggesting someone to help Grandpa reorganize his estate. A friend of a friend. Someone efficient. The pieces began to align. I located Grandpa's old attorney, Mr. Barnwell, retired but still reachable. He confirmed what I feared. Your grandfather never told me he wanted to change his will, he said. In fact, the last time we spoke, he said everything was settled. So why would a new will exist? I asked. Only two reasons, he replied. Either he freely changed his mind, or someone else convinced him to. He paused. Or worse. Those two words sat heavy between us. I requested copies of both wills, the old draft and the finalized document. When the packet arrived, I laid the pages side by side on my dining table. My stomach tightened. The signature on the final will, the one giving the workshop to Michael, looked off. Subtle differences. Pressure points wrong. A slight upward tilt that Grandpa's hand never had. I wasn't trained in handwriting analysis, but I didn't need to be. I'd watched that hand carve grooves into hardwood for decades. I knew it like my own. I photographed both signatures and added them to the folder. With evidence mounting, I reached out to attorney Rachel Hart. Highly recommended, meticulous, and firm in her ethics. After reviewing my documents, she said one sentence that changed everything. Linda, this will needs to be examined formally. There is reasonable suspicion of undue influence, or potential forgery. The word forgery echoed through my chest. If true, then Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed Grandpa. And he'd committed a crime to do it. I sat quietly, the weight of the truth forming like a beam settling into place. Rachel closed the file. If you pursue this, she said, your brother will be forced to answer questions he won't want to answer. Good, I thought. Because I was done waiting for the truth. I was ready to uncover it. Rachel advises Linda to request the workshop's full sale contract, something Michael has desperately avoided letting her see. The turning point came the following Thursday. Quiet, unceremonious, the way most important moments arrive. I had just finished my second cup of morning coffee when Rachel called. The sale contract came through, she said. You'll want to see this. When I arrived at her office, she slid a thin folder toward me. Inside was the purchase agreement between Michael and the supposed cash buyers. Only, the buyers weren't strangers. They were a shell company. Formed 3 weeks ago. Registered under an address Michael had used before on short-term ventures. In other words, he was selling the workshop to himself. To flip it later without paying inheritance tax. Or to hide proceeds. Or both. The betrayal deepened into something almost architectural in its precision. He's cornered himself, Rachel said. If he proceeds with this sale, he risks fraud charges. If he cancels it, we have grounds for contesting the will. I closed the folder slowly. It felt like holding evidence carved from bone. For a long moment, I simply breathed. Steady. Even. Letting the truth settle. He thinks I won't fight him, I said. Rachel nodded. Most bullies count on that. She wasn't wrong. For years, I had let Michael's selfishness roll off me like rain off tin. I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict, that peace was more valuable than being right. But peace built on injustice isn't peace. It's surrender dressed in quiet clothes. That was the moment something shifted in me. A settling of resolve. The return of my backbone. I want to move forward, I said. All the way. Rachel smiled, The kind of smile professionals reserve for clients who finally recognize their own power. Then we'll begin. The next steps came quickly. A formal request to freeze the workshop sale. A handwriting expert retained. A financial analyst reviewing the shell company records. A petition to examine Grandpa's medical state at the time of the supposed will signing. Each step strengthened my case. Each step cornered Michael further. Meanwhile, I went to the workshop alone at sunset. I stood in the doorway, inhaled the smell of pine, motor oil, and memories. The light caught the dust motes in the air, tiny flickers floating like suspended time. I whispered aloud, "I'm not letting this go, Grandpa. You trusted me." Saying it out loud grounded something in me. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was restoration. Ethical. Methodical. Unshakably calm. The next morning, Michael called. His voice was sharp, brittle. "What are you doing, Linda?" "Following the truth," I said. "You're making a mistake." "No," I replied. "You did." His silence crackled through the phone. Then, quietly, fearfully, he said, "We need to talk." For the first time since this began, he sounded like someone who knew the tide had turned. And I wasn't done turning it. "Michael asks to meet privately, but Linda has already prepared a strategy that will leave him with no room to lie."